We welcome to the show now U.S. Senate candidate Carly Fiorina. Carly, welcome to the show. I hope you are well. I saw you this weekend or last weekend at the CRP. Did you enjoy that experience?
I did. It was great to be back with all those folks, and glad to be on with you again, Inga.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. What caught my attention about your press releases this week was your call to Barbara Boxer to make a statement against the White House's position on Israel and building settlements, or building homes on the settlements in East Jerusalem. I'd love you to expound on that. I know that today the president sort of backed off, as has Hillary Clinton, of their demands.
Well, what's troubling to me about this whole incident, first of all, the decision that was announced was, I believe, the third in a 7-step zoning process. The territory that was being talked about here, East Jerusalem, has never been in contention or in question. The buildings in that particular area of Jerusalem have never before been referred to as settlements. So there were a couple things that the White House did. First, it called into question a territory that has never been disputed before. Secondly, it took a relatively small decision and blew it up into a major diplomatic encounter. And third, I think it put our most important ally in the region in a very awkward position. I think the U.S. needs to stand by Israel, needs to call the Palestinians to the peacemaking table without preconditions. Israel has already made unprecedented concessions. And so I was very distraught that this is the way our administration chose to handle what should have been a relatively minor incident on the part of our strongest ally in the region.
Yeah, what really troubled me, and this all unfolded, in fact, while we were up in Santa Clara at the Republican Party convention, so I was watching it all unfold up there. And what struck me, what I didn't understand, Carly, was why an international incident occurred just because the White House was offended that the announcement that these homes would be built happened while Joe Biden was there. So what?
Well, exactly.
I don't get it.
And I don't. It's pretty clear from the subsequent explanation that this zoning decision, which is what it was a routine announcement. It sort of had nothing to do with Joe Biden. It had nothing to do with Netanyahu. And yet the White House turns this into a major diplomatic incident and, of course, contrast that reaction to the reaction of the administration when the presidents of Syria and Iran get together and talk about the destruction of the state of Israel, and the White House says nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And not only did this incident, I think, embarrass our nation and Israel, but it also gave fodder to those Palestinians and Arab nations to demand that I was reading today, they're demanding that the Israelis stop building where they had intended to build because the president sort of gave them the foot in the door.
Exactly. And so here's a territory in East Jerusalem that has never been in question. It's never been disputed. And all of a sudden it's in dispute. We, as the United States, have created yet another obstacle to peace for all the wrong reasons. One of the things I called for in my speech this weekend before the CRP was we need clarity and common sense when it comes to our national security. And we need clarity in particular around who are our friends and who are our enemies. Israel is our friend. Iran is our enemy. We have to be crystal clear about that, and I do not believe that the administration has been, and that's why I called on Barbara Boxer to actually step forward and say something.
Well, and the reason why the president, I think, failed so miserably this last weekend, and I'm not saying that to be partisan, I'm saying it because it's true, is I think because he seems to have, Carly, an elementary grasp of what's happening over there. I've only been there once, and I've been to the same places he has toured, the military bases, the sites that have been bombed, Sderot, which gets thousands and thousands of Qassams that fly over from the Palestinian areas. And his I remember one of his speeches where he said, Israel should be free to protect itself. That was his big statement. And so I think he has but an elementary understanding of what's happening over there. I really do.
Well, whatever the explanation is, I think, unfortunately, both we and our ally, Israel, have now taken a huge step back in terms of our ability to make peace. One of the things that gives Israel the ability to make peace is the perception that they are backed always by a strong and invincible ally in the United States who will stand by them. And when that perception is shaken, and it has been, then we put Israel and ourselves in a very awkward position.
Yeah.
And, all of our president's willingness to travel to the Muslim world and try and make amends, that's what he thought we needed to do. I don't agree with that. But all of his attempts to make amends have not gotten us anything.
Yeah, you're right. Now, you came out in your press release with a criticism of Barbara Boxer for not criticizing the White House. What is the role of Barbara Boxer in your mind? Or better yet, if you were U.S. Senator, what is your role as a U.S. Senator on an issue like this?
Well, the U.S. Senate obviously plays a vital role in the execution of our foreign policy. So the Senate plays a vital role in how we handle enemy combatants. The Senate plays a vital role in influencing the President of the United States and the Department of State in terms of foreign policy. And Barbara Boxer has been all too willing to step forward and criticize the President on other matters. This President, as well as other presidents. She criticized President Obama for his decision to increase troops to Afghanistan. She certainly criticized President Bush mightily for his prosecution of the war in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I think it is in keeping both with her role as a U.S. Senator and her past behavior to ask her to step forward and say, we need to take a different direction here with this, our most important ally in the region.
Your thoughts on U.S. Senate candidate Tom Campbell and the recent dust-up over this professor in South Florida and his comments on death to Israel. I had Tom called my show the other day and explained his position on how that happened and his regret. Your thoughts on that?
Well, unfortunately, his explanation doesn't jive with the letter he wrote. The letter is clear that he had read the transcript of the interviews in question. Unfortunately, death to Israel is a pretty common chant of Hamas sympathizers. It's not that that's an unusual thing for them to say. So, your listeners will have to decide for themselves, but I think it is not particularly credible to claim that a Hamas sympathizer would not have said death to Israel and that Tom would not have known about that.
Yeah, well, he kind of explained it as being more of an academic thing and, professors having courtesy toward each other and protecting each other's freedoms of speech. And I understand that. It's just I don't know how it shakes out in the real world. I get in academia they have different rules, but I don't know how that translates to me.
Well, what I think people want to know about all of us especially those of us who are seeking to represent the people of California, I think what people want to know is what are our core convictions? What are our core beliefs? Do we have credible, consistent explanations for our behavior? And is our behavior consistent with our core beliefs and our core convictions?
Yeah, and to that, you were asked at the CRP this weekend during the press conference about, and I know you've answered this question many times, but while we're on the issues of the Middle East and Israel, about Hewlett-Packard and the Iran sales. Can you clarify that for people?
Well, sure. First of all, Hewlett-Packard has always complied with every aspect of U.S. law with regard to whatever sales were made, in this case, by a distributor in the region to Iran. What your listeners may not know is Dell computers are sold in Iran, Apple iPhones are sold in Iran. There are certain products which are permitted by U.S. law to be sold in Iran.
Well, and that's good news because when the riots happen and the protests occur, that's the only way we find out what's happening there.
Well, exactly. And so now it's also true that it's vitally important, in my opinion, that we now put into place sanctions against Iran. And so I have also called on Barbara Boxer and President Obama and others to stop talking and to start acting. The truth is the Senate has passed a bill permitting the president to enact sanctions. The House has passed a bill. Those two bills need to be reconciled while we're in a rush to deem and scheme and whatever they're doing in the House on health care. The truth is we ought to be reconciling these two sanctions bills, get the president to sign it, begin to enact sanctions against Iran because talk isn't helping. The UN, Russia and China are never going to agree with us on Iran. We ought to quit talking about it and start acting.
Absolutely. In the press conference, Carly, this last weekend, somebody asked you how you felt about Steve Poizner's position on essentially revisiting Prop 187 and eliminating benefits to even children of illegal immigrants in the state of California. And your answer included, this is a conversation basically we can have after we secure the borders, but you didn't specify how we could secure the borders. Meg Whitman says using more technology. What do you think the role of the U.S. Senate, or you as a U.S. Senator, is in securing our borders?
Well, securing the borders is a federal government responsibility. And the federal government has failed in its responsibility. In fact, I would argue that securing the nation and securing the borders is the most important role of federal government, and we're not doing it. And, of course, the consequence of the federal government's failure to secure the border is that a state like California is crushed by the burden of all of these illegal immigrants here in this state. So when I say it's a top priority, what that means in the real world is you do whatever is necessary to secure the border.
Police.
More money, more manpower, more technology, whatever it takes. But it's the federal government's role to secure the border. And as a U.S. Senator, therefore, I would play a very important role to say we must now step forward and secure this border.
Excellent. One more question for you. I'd be remiss in my job, Carly Fiorina, if I did not ask you your thoughts about this health care reform bill. You are lucky enough to not have to be part of this right now, but if you were in the U.S. Senate, you would be. And I'd just love to see your observations on how they're pushing this bill through.
Well, it's just really distressing to see what's happening. And, in some ways I wish I were there now. But first of all, nothing that takes 2,700 pages to explain can be good news. Because 2,700 pages is so complex, there will be so many contradictions inside that bill that there's no way it can solve more problems than it creates. The truth is this bill creates more problems than it solves. It increases taxes by $500 billion. It's going to cut Medicare in unspecified ways, which means it won't happen well, or it won't happen at all, which means it will be yet another huge cost burden that will add to our deficit. But now to see Nancy Pelosi and others in the House basically saying, the House doesn't have to pass a bill. Mm-hmm. We don't have to follow the Constitution here. We're going to come up with this new set of rules, and we're going to deem that this Senate version will pass, which they don't have the votes to pass in the House. We're going to send it to the President's desk, and then we're going to reconcile it with another 2,300 pages. This is criminal almost to me, because it means that we are bypassing the will of the people, which is clear in this regard. We're bypassing, in some ways, the Constitution, which requires that a bill pass both the House and the Senate before it can be sent to the President. And we're going to end up here, if, heaven forbid, this thing passes, we're going to end up here with thousands and thousands and thousands of pages which add to our deficit and don't solve the underlying problem.
Yeah, every one of those pages. Every time legislators go to work, when they go home, I fear that they're taking with them my liberties and freedoms, and that's an awful lot of pages full of comments about my liberties and freedoms, and I find it unconscionable. You said perhaps illegal. I say immoral regardless.
Well, and absolutely, and one of the things I said this weekend is, this health care bill has been written by a doctor, Dr. Frankenstein. Yeah. We need to start over. This thing is a monster now that we can't kill.
Yeah.
Only the American people can kill this one.
You are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. Carly Fiorina, thank you so much for your time. I wish you the best of luck as you move toward June. This is going to be an interesting time in American history, and you're a part of it, and that's got to be a pretty cool feeling.
Well, I think it is a pivotal time in American history. That is why I am doing this. I think we have to take our government back and make it work, and I appreciate so much the opportunity to chat with you, Inga.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.